Thank you very much, Ben. It's a treat to be here. And you might say, why in the world would Bob think it's a treat to address a topic like confronting? It's because I have seen lives transformed and God's kingdom advanced because of skills in this area. And it's something that is so applicable to all of us. I mean, imagine how many of you have had an issue with someone that you have needed to address them about, and it caused you anxiety and tension, and you knew that the stakes were really high for you to address that. We've all had those experiences. It's not uncommon to any of us. We know that being in the world and in relationship with people means that we're going to have opportunities where we need to address things, where we feel very strongly about them and the stakes are high. And if that's the case, if this is something that we all experience, I would think that God's Word would address that in some way. I would think that God would want to speak to that subject. And He does, many times. One of the places He does that is in 2 Timothy chapter 2. In verse 24 it says this, "And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, and correcting his opponents with gentleness." What does that mean, to correct someone gently? And why is it that when we do that, when we try so hard to be gentle, it seems like those conversations often just go sideways on us, and it becomes nothing close to gentle? Why is that? I think we need to know what it is that we do and we bring to these conversations that cause them to end up in ways that we never envisioned or never desired. And God cares about that. He wants our relationships to honor Him. He knows that He's created us to be relational people. We have relationships with God, and also our relationships with one another reflect that divine imprint that's on us. In fact, I would say our relationships with one another have a sacred purpose of putting God's kingdom on display to the world around us in a way that they say, my way doesn't work, but there's something about what they have that I desire. I want us to take a look at the broader context of this verse in 2 Timothy. I'll read from verses 14 through 26 here, and just follow along and try to get a picture of where Paul is addressing this aspect of confronting others in the context of this chapter. He says in verse 14, "Remind them of these things, and charge them before God not to quarrel about words, which does no good, but only ruins the hearers. Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. But avoid irreverent babble, for it will lead people into more and more ungodliness. And their talk will spread like gangrene. Among them are Hymenaeus and Philetus, who have swerved from the truth, saying that the resurrection has already happened. They are upsetting the faith of some. But God's firm foundation stands, bearing this seal: the Lord knows those who are His. And let everyone who names the name of the Lord depart from iniquity. Now, in a great house there are not only vessels of gold and silver, but also of wood and clay, some for honorable use, some for dishonorable. Therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from what is dishonorable, he will be a vessel for honorable use, set apart as holy, useful to the master of the house, ready for every good work. So flee youthful passions and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. Have nothing to do with foolish, ignorant controversies. You know that they breed quarrels. And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponents with gentleness. God may perhaps grant them repentance, leading to a knowledge of the truth, and they may come to their senses and escape from the snare of the devil after being captured by him to do his will. Lord, I know that it's not the power of the creativity of man's words that transform. It's the power of your Spirit. And that Spirit speaks through your living word. We pray for that Spirit to come and teach and speak this morning. As we reflect on these words, we desire to know more of you, know more of your goodness for us through these words. Amen. Let's take a quick look at the context of this passage, where it comes in this letter. We know that this is a letter from Paul, who was a prominent leader in the church. He was a missionary, and he was also the mentor to the recipient of this letter, a young man named Timothy, who was his disciple, and there was also a pastor. In fact, Timothy was pastoring one of Paul's church plants in the city of Ephesus. We know a lot about Ephesus, actually. Ephesus was a coastal city, and it was a very affluent city. It was a commercial center of its day. In fact, it was a very respected city in the region. You could think of Ephesus during that time as kind of the New York City of its day. It was very large, it was very well known, and it was the city that was the center of a lot of commerce. But it was a difficult time to be a Christian in the city of Ephesus. When Paul writes this letter to Timothy, it comes just a few years after Nero had set Rome on fire and then needed a scapegoat, and so he decided to say it was the Christians that did it. And now word has spread from Rome all throughout the Roman Empire to Ephesus, and Christians were being targeted for slander and often worse. And what happens sometimes in communities is this external pressure brings up internal pressure that's also there. And they're starting to see that in the church of Ephesus. And there's a lot of division and conflict that was taking place. And Paul was encouraging Timothy to confront that, to lean into it, to go forward and address those issues that were facing his church. And he uses a word picture to help Timothy understand what is happening there. Let's take a closer look at that. It's in verse 20. He says, "Now in a great house there are not only vessels of gold and silver, but also of wood and clay." And so he invites Timothy, first of all, to think of a great house. What does that mean? What does it mean, a great house? This translation says great house. In the NIV or NASB, you might be reading that. It says that it's a large house, which just means in a house that's very large. And some translations are a little bit better, I think. They're closer to the reality, like the Net Bible. It calls it a wealthy home. Why would I think that that's more accurate? The reason is because it is more consistent with the way that the early church operated. And that is that they met in people's homes. And we see that in numerous places. In Philippi, they met in Lydia's home. In Corinth, they met in Justus's home. And in Thessalonica, they met in Jason's home. And so it would be common practice that they met in someone's home. But what about Ephesus? Do we know where they met there? Actually, we do. It talks about it in Acts chapter 19. It says that they would meet in the hall of Tyrannus. When Paul first went to Ephesus, he taught in the synagogue, which was his practice. But what often happened is that the Jews who worshiped there, they thought of the Christians as an unorthodox sect, and they were no longer permitted to meet in the synagogue, and so they needed to find another place. And here, it says that they met in the hall of Tyrannus. There's no other place in the New Testament that talks about a meeting place with this type of terminology. And so it was difficult for people to translate. What is this hall? Some people felt like it was a school. that people met at, that a school that was available at certain times of the day that they could use, and that's kind of ironic given where we're meeting this morning. So that could be the case. It makes sense. Some people think it was just a meeting hall because Ephesus was such a large city. Maybe they had a meeting hall that was available for people that they could use for different meetings to take place. And some people feel like, well, it was actually a hall, a large room in someone's private home. And that's what I believe is the case. And the reason is this, is because I've actually been to Ephesus a number of times. It was close to where we lived. And Ephesus has been one of the most studied cities of that ancient world. And the reason is because there was an earthquake that took place shortly after this was written. And the people of Ephesus left the city. And then over time, the harbor that was used there was silted over. The river dumped silt into the harbor and it was no longer usable. So people did build, but they didn't build on that site. And so everything's preserved there. And people are digging it away and they can look. It is a wonderful place to go look. In all of the archaeological work that they've done there, they've never found a school that people would go to. In fact, the teaching was not there at the school. People think it was done probably at the steps of the library. There was teaching done there. There are big meeting areas there. One was for the Senate, and one was an incredible amphitheater that took place, and we read about that also in Acts, that there was a riot that took place, and people were in the amphitheater. But that wouldn't have been a place where the early church would meet, so there is no school like that. They also haven't found a meeting hall. And so they haven't discovered anything like that, but they have discovered something that's quite amazing. Because it was such a wealthy city, a number of people in Ephesus earned so much money that they could build what they call these terrace houses on the opposite side of the valley of where the city was built. And these terrace houses are incredible. They are amazing. And there are big halls, as you can see from this picture of Ephesus there. There are large halls where the early church could meet. I think Tyrannus is a person who chose to make Christ his king. And because of that, he said, I'm going to open up my home so that people can come and meet in my hall. And that's what I believe took place. Why does it matter? Because I think Paul is writing to Timothy from a context he understands. Think of the kingdom of God as you would this mansion. And when you go in there and you teach and you meet, observe all the things that you see there in this mansion. What do you see? You see that it has a number of vessels. I'd also like to take a look at that word vessel and what it means there. If the mansion refers to God's kingdom and those who come under his rule and submit themselves to being a part of the body that worships the master of the mansion, then what do the vessels mean? Well, the vessel is a Greek word that's pronounced skios, and it can be translated as a vessel, but I think it's too small. I don't think that's just all of what Paul's talking about. The vessel can also be translated as instrument, as an implement, as a piece of equipment, as a utensil, or as a tool. All of those are proper translations of the word skios. I think that's what Paul is saying. He says, when you go into the house, look at all the things that you see there, all the different utensils and instruments and tools that you see. There's something that I want you to know about that. I especially like the translation tool because I enjoy tools. I like working with tools. Do you have a favorite tool that comes to mind? A favorite utensil that you use? Favorite piece of equipment? Think about it this way. If you were required to move someplace, maybe move far away, what are some of the things that you have that you say, these are in the must-go pile? I will not live without this. There are good tools that we have, aren't there? I think a good tool is a lot like this one. I brought one to you this morning, but I got a picture up there for you to be able to see. So this is specifically a deep well 6-sided socket, 5/8 inch. It's a little bit knurled on the side so it's not smooth. It also has an adapter on it so that you can put a wrench on the outside of it. And inside is a piece of rubber, a rubber insert in there that's designed for that reason. If you think you know what this tool is for, just turn to the person next to you and tell them what this is for. If you said that this tool was for installing and removing spark plugs, you are correct. How did you know that? Many of you have used the tool probably. You also know that it was designed specifically to do just that. The reason why there's a rubber insert in there is to protect the ceramic of the spark plug so that it doesn't get damaged, right? And so this tool, someone thought out, how do I make a tool to do that job well? And that is part of what I think Paul wants Timothy to know about this. In a great house, you will see there, in this mansion, you will see that there are many different tools and instruments. And they are created for a purpose. Good tools are created for a purpose, if you're following in your notes there. Just like that spark plug socket. But you know, you can't get the job done oftentimes with the socket. There's too many things that get in the way, right? There's all kinds of cables and sensors and other things that prevent you from actually getting the socket on there. And so you need something like this extension. You need to have an extension to be able to do the job. And now with the extension, we can get past all of those different things that are in the way, and we can get to where the spark plug is. You know, there are some times when we just can't get the job done. We can't get to it, and we need someone's help. We need someone else to kind of partner with us to be able to do what we've been asked to do. And God provides an extension for us, someone else that gets us to be able to do the job we've been asked to do. But anyone who's ever changed a spark plug knows that actually you're not going to do the job with just a spark plug socket and extension. You need something else, and that is a ratchet, right? You need a ratchet. The ratchet now provides the leverage that is necessary to be able to get the spark plug out of where it is. And so that is the case too. Sometimes in our life we also need some extra help that way. We need some resourcing. We need some leverage to help us do the job that we need to do. Now with all three of these tools, we can do what is necessary to do the job. So I think Paul is telling Timothy this, that good tools are created for a purpose, and that those purposes are different. They are different from one another. Even though I know that we've all been created by God for different divine purposes, I can sometimes feel a little insecure when I observe the different ways that other people are gifted. Is that sometimes the case for you? Maybe that is what's at the root of some of the conflicts we have, is our own personal insecurity of like, that is such a good socket. I wish I could do that. But I've been created for a different purpose. And God has created all of us uniquely. What would it be like if we took time to celebrate one another's differences instead of being critical or being insecure about those differences we see? When we acknowledge the goodness of God's creation in others, it is an act of worshiping Him. You think about that? I mean, sometimes we think, especially for those of us from Minnesota, it's not good to praise other people's, especially our children. No, we don't do that, right? But there is a way of acknowledging the goodness and ways in someone else, in the way they've been created, that actually worships the Creator. And when we point that out, as a matter, it not only encourages them, it encourages us because we're reflecting on the goodness that God has put in that person and his divine stamp on them. Sometimes, though, I just don't have the right tool to do the job. It's just not, it doesn't exist. I just can't get the tool onto the part that I'm working on. You know, I have a set of tools in my toolbox, a set of wrenches specifically, that are just there for modifying. And here's one that I've modified here. I've actually cut it off, and I've bent it twice at 90-degree angles. I had to heat it up to do that. Just heat it up with a torch till it's red hot, bent it over. At the end of this, I have filed it down and made it quite a bit thinner so that it could get into the place it needed to get into. And also some filing on here, which means taking it to a grinding wheel and just holding it to it, taking out parts of it, and again, chopping the end off. I've had to modify it quite a bit, but the nice thing about this is now I have a tool that helps me get the job done. And I know where to get that when I need it to do the job that I have modified it to do. I don't know about you, but it doesn't sound like much fun to be heated up and to have things ground off. But sometimes I think that's what God needs to do with us. We have been created for a purpose, it's true. But he needs to modify us for something that he's calling us to do. And there's a way of thinking out there that says, no, only do the things that you're good at. Only do the things that you especially feel gifted at. And I recognize that there's some truth in that, but I know that I have seen sometimes people think, oh, I'll never be good at this, or I'll never be able to do it. And God says, come with me. I am drawing you to do something, to experience me more, because it is uncomfortable, because it is a little bit hot for you, and because parts of you are there that I want to remove. And it's not fun. And sometimes we feel during those seasons that we are way far away from God. Where are you in this? Don't you see that this is painful? But we don't recognize that not only is he there, he's the author of it. He is helping us to grow. He's helping us to become what he wants us to be. So good tools, they've been created for a purpose, and those purposes are different. And those can change. The purposes can change with God's help and with his attentiveness to it. So Paul is telling Timothy to confront someone honorably, respectfully. It requires us acknowledging that God has created them for a divine purpose, one that is different than mine, and one that he may be in the process of changing. And while someone's going under that stress and the pressure of change, they might not be like we've experienced them before. And that might be what we're experiencing, is that they're going through that. But there's another part of this illustration that I think is important. Because I can take, in my desire to install and then remove a spark plug, I can take these tools and still not be able to get the task done. There's something important that needs to take place. I need to insert the extension to the bracket and then that into the socket. And now, with this set of tools together connected, I am able to do the job that I need to do. The individual tools aren't able to accomplish it as individuals, but they need to be connected together, and now the job can get done. Good tools need to be willing to work with others. And we see that in this passage. In verse 14, Paul tells Timothy, charge, meaning his congregation before God, not to quarrel about words. In verse 16, he says, avoid irreverent babble. In verse 23 through 25, he writes, have nothing to do with foolish, ignorant controversies. You know that they breed quarrels, and the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponents with gentleness. You kind of get the impression that working with each other is important to God. He addresses it over and over here. You know, in our role of providing pastoral care for missionaries, one of the things we get called to do oftentimes is help them work through conflicts with one another. Does that surprise anyone? Sometimes people think, well, missionaries of all people should be equipped and able to love one another well. But they're just like you. They just go through life in ways that issues come up and difficult subjects need to be addressed. And sometimes they feel ill-equipped to do it. We just received a letter from someone in Asia that said, presently there are two couples that are struggling to get along and have struggled to get along. They just seem to never be able to leave each other alone. So they persist in their struggle. After several years of meetings, splitting up teams, etc., this problem persists. Can you help? You ever been in that situation? This has gone on for so long. Why is it that we can't make it work? But there is this awareness that somehow connecting with each other is important. Confronting someone honorably means that we come to them with a posture of wanting to connect with them. It's very difficult because when we need to confront someone, one of the things we most often feel is a desire to withdraw. And we need to do the opposite. We need to lean in. And when we do that, the other person experiences that. They know, they can sense, this is someone who wants to be connected to me. When I turned 16 years old, my parents gave me a very nice gift. It was a 1967 forest green Mustang. I was expecting more response than that. I really liked it. It did need a little bit of work, though, and so I enjoyed working on it with my father, and we made it look really nice. And I remember oftentimes people would notice the car, and they would say, wow, that is a nice looking car. Did you do any work on it, And they would ask, who did the work? And I was able to say, well, my father and we did the work, restoring this car to what it looks like now. Never once did anyone ever ask, what tools did you use in restoring that car? Good tools actually are useless unless they have a skilled user who knows how to use them. Verse 21 says this, therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from what is dishonorable, he will be a vessel for honorable use, set apart as holy, useful to the master of the house, ready for every good work. You want to know if what you're doing is the right thing? Don't ask yourself how often that people give you praise for that, but how often are they saying, that must be an amazing God that person serves. Who is getting glory for what you do? This is not a message to encourage you to somehow work harder, do better, change. It's not for that. There are things that we can do. There is some equipping that can take place, and we are looking forward to having some time with you as we explore different tools and different ways to do better at managing conflicts and confronting one another when we see those issues. But the most important thing is to say, as a community, as individuals, change comes when we depend on God, the Master, who can help us with this. I invite you just to take a moment to reflect personally on what we've looked at in these passages. Just pause for a moment and quiet yourself before God. What do you sense Him speaking to your soul at this time? What is something that you want to take away from this? Maybe there's a face that keeps coming to mind when we talk about this subject of confronting. What do you sense God's asking you to do with that? Psalm 133 was read this morning, and it's a song of ascent. And with this psalm, people gathered together and they would sing together as they walked up the mountain to go to the temple and to worship God. And they sang how good it is to be connected, to be together, to be unified. They were worshiping God because of what He did with them together. Lord, use us for your purposes. Use us together where there is strife. Help us. Use us to heal that. We ask you to cleanse us so that we are honorable instruments for your purpose. Transform us by your Spirit. Bless us, God, for your glory. Not so much that others look at us and say, aren't they talented? Aren't they good? Lord, use us for your glory so that you are, in fact, glorified through that. Say, there is a good God behind that I want to know, that I want to join in worship.